Hello and welcome to the fourth edition of Cutting Through the AI Hype in Canada. It's a series dedicated to exploring how responsible AI is fostering innovation and transforming key business sectors in Canada. My name is Derek Marinos, your host and moderator for today's discussion that will take a closer look at AI's early stage impact on the public sector, how it is addressing some key service delivery challenges, and AI's potential to improve engagement with citizens. I'm thrilled to introduce our esteemed panel of experts who bring a wealth of experience from government, technology, and policy spheres. Let's meet the panel. Dr. Diane Gutyew is CGI's Global AI Research Lead. With 30 years of hands-on experience in AI and machine learning, Dr. Gutyew has been at the forefront of driving data-driven solutions in public health, epidemiology, and beyond. She's led critical projects, including analyzing COVID data in British Columbia, and has implemented solutions across Canada, the UK, and the United States. Dr. Gutyew holds a PhD in expert AI system adoption and has also earned a certificate in medical AI from Harvard Medical School. Mr. Alex Benet is the Associate Deputy Minister at Public Services and Procurement Canada, with a distinguished career that includes serving as Deputy Minister at the Treasury Board of Canada. Mr. Benet is also the author of two books, Canadian Failures and Digital and Government Digital. And Mr. Alexandre Sinet is a senior CGI executive overseeing operations in the National Capital Region with more than 20 years of experience, including 13 years at the Caisse de dépôt du placement du Québec, where he was instrumental in managing global tech investments and driving digital transformation. Alexandre is also a board member with Mila. Welcome to you all.
Thank you.
Good morning.
Morning, Derek.
Yeah, good morning. Let's begin with the State of the Union and understanding the current context and public sector landscape. Diana, I'd like to kick things off with you. Let's talk a bit about what many public sector leaders are telling us. And if you could introduce us to a bit of the CGI voice of our clients, which shares findings from our in-depth interviews with business and IT executives across many industries and geographic regions we serve. Please talk about the three key takeaways identified for public sector.
Yeah, thanks, Derek. It's really what we saw in voice of our client is what we're hearing when we go out and we meet with different leaders in the public sector. There's a lot of excitement about the greater accessibility of AI. As we know, AI is not new. We've been doing this for a long time with traditional AI, but generative AI has really opened the door to being able to do things in a much more straightforward way because of the natural language approach, and the accessibility. It really does come down to that. What we're hearing is that there's a lot of excitement. There definitely is interest in what we're going to be able to do with this new technology. And the conversation's shifting from what do we do with this technology? How do we use it to how do we make it useful? And that's what we're definitely starting to see. In the voice of the client, we saw about 79% of public sector respondents are exploring and experimenting with what they're going to be able to do, but the actual implementation, the move into production, is still much lower. There's a few gateways to get through with privacy, security, policies are rapidly developing around the use, and there's a bit of a challenge in keeping the policies up to date, future-proofing them for where we're going to be able to see the technology move because it's moving so quickly. So, I'd say that's the biggest takeaway is that, that there's lots of hands-on experimentation and there's still a bit of a gap in moving those into production, but it's happening. We're seeing it happen. And I think it's going to be a rapid move in 2025 towards more actual implementations.
Those are interesting perspectives. And of course, the CGI voice of our clients, Alex Sinet, just for some brief context, a bit about the importance of this dialogue and this conversation we have with our little corner of the world, and how this vehicle really provides some insights to accelerate some tangible and trusted incomes.
Thank you, Derek. The voice of a client, I've been at CGI for the last 12 months, and maybe it's the most important discovery for me. The voice of a client is a mine of information. This is an inside view on the top trends on the business and IT priorities around all our global clients around the world, all industries, all locations. And CGI, as you know, is more than 40 countries in the world. So it means it is a big endeavor. This is and like Diane was saying, AI comes on top of mind for all executive, not only in the sector of the government side, but also on all sector, it's top of mind. It enables, a voice of client, one of the key important thing is that it enables our clients to benchmark themselves, to be able to compare themselves with within their digital journey. How do they compare to others in their industry, and also on other industries, so they can get inspired also on other industry, other approach, other priorities maybe, or different priorities, maybe not other, but maybe different. So I think that's very interesting. And just to give you for the audience here, in the last 5 years, we're talking about over 8,000 conversations, because this voice of a client is being done by interview. It's not like a little survey. It's really conversations. So it's important. We're getting that feedback from all the BU around the world, and that I think we collected in the last 5 years more than 1 million data points. So that's a lot of information.
Which is fundamental as well to getting to know and understand our ecosystem and then impacting it in a real positive way. And Alex Benay, I'd like to turn to you now, because having this conversation is really important, and hearing perspectives is vital as well. We're talking obviously about public sector and AI, and I want to get some context from you as well on what some of the major challenges are currently facing public sector service, especially considering where we are with demand and resources.
Yeah, I think maybe a couple things. I think when you're delivering a public service versus a private service, and I've worked in both, so I feel fairly okay with my generalization that's about to come out of my mouth here, but like, you owe more checks and balances when you deliver a public service than a private service. It's not to say that there's no regulation and none of these other things in a private service, but it's just there is a large amount of laws, policies, and other things. So to me, that's step one. So using private sector code that isn't accessible from a black box perspective is slightly tricky. Because if you can't explain how the service is being delivered or generated, it exposes public sector to a lot of risk. One would argue it's the same in the private sector. So the second biggest difference, or the biggest challenge, I would say, is our culture. Most public sectors around the world operate in a culture of compliance, not in a culture of empowerment. There's a great book by Dan Honig out of the University of Georgetown called Mission-Driven Bureaucrats, which talks about the need to kind of shift to empowerment, but realizes that most governments around the world work in a culture of compliance. So it means that people fear doing things differently. And so if you look at how we design ideas or new services in government, generally around the world, or at least in the government of Canada, historically, it's been how many people do we need to hire to deliver the new service? Therefore, it's going to cost X amount of dollars. So at birth of the idea, it's more industrial age based than it is digital. And so the way we should be considering it is, can this be codified? And can we put a few bright service people in the room with a few bright AI people and actually deliver the thing differently? But things being what they are, when you're under the gun and time crunches, you revert to what you know. So you continue designing industrial age-based digital services. So I think if we're able to move to a digital first service delivery environment in public sectors around the world, I would hope, at least in Canada, because you keep seeing our national rankings slip in the UN World Rankings, we would need to be able to say it's going digital first, but we fear it because we come up with excuses and policy this and that and the other thing, or connectivity is not great in all the regions across Canada, when in reality, digital first doesn't mean digital only. And if we were to do a digital first approach, then I think you'd see way more, I'd say, real case adoption of AI, as opposed to what Diane was mentioning around sort of the experimentation. Because we would want to deliver the best service possible, but digitally. So to me, it's definitely, there are some legal policy challenges, sure, but there's probably more cultural challenges than anything.
and this is really interesting because it seems to me we're coming to an inflection point where there's going to be a fiscal imperative of some kind, that we're almost at that intersection where that part needs to accelerate. And Diane, I'd like to come to you very briefly for a response on that, because we're crashing into where governance meets how can we accelerate this. And I think your perspective here would be really interesting to talk a bit about that and how that can actually assist or help in moving forward once those guardrails are there.
Yeah, and I think it's a really interesting area, because we need to set up an approach, and we're seeing that as policies develop in Canada, the EU AI Act, what we're seeing evolve in the US is really looking at how can we set guardrails, as you mentioned, rather than roadblocks.
Yeah.
And then how can we also use these guardrails to foster innovation, to future-proof the policy and the strategy? You know, it's a hard nut to crack. What we're starting to see is most organizations are leaning on what we've been using in research principles for years. Anytime you're using data to help drive a decision, anytime you're using data for anything that's going to have an impact on policy or direction, you want to be able to make sure those principles are covered. And that's what you're starting to see in a lot of the policy guidelines, provincially as well as federally, I think, is focusing on, you know, do we have the right safeguards in place for privacy, transparency, robustness, reliability, security, and focus on what the solution is. What's the intent? What's the problem you're trying to solve? And then look at what's the technology, what's the data, what's the risk. Rather than trying to paint all AI with the same brush, it's not all the same risk level. That's a big foundation in the EU AI Act. I've seen that a lot of what we're seeing in the Canadian legislation that's being formed now, you know, is really how can we focus on solving a problem? And it goes back to, rather than let's just throw this generative AI or even traditional AI at everything, you know, what's the problem and now what's the technology? How do we make this useful to solve some of the big strategic problems we have right now? And that's going to make the big difference. And it's very much custom fit. My last thought is, you know, we saw during COVID that when we had a hard problem that we had to solve, that wasn't just health. It was all kinds of policy needed to be developed rapidly and change. When you lean on data to help find evidence-based direction, you can really go a long way. And this is a fantastic tool when we have a large problem with multiple sectors, organizations working together, that we can leverage to get an answer.
No, that's really interesting. And Alexandre Sinnett, I think Diane is guiding us in a direction right now where I think a lot of these conversations are starting to happen at the executive level, at the leadership level. From your perspective, are you hearing more and more of this now? Do you think that we are taking those steps, those critical steps to get there?
I think with all the conversation we're having here in Ottawa with deputy minister, assistant deputy minister, or I think it's really what I see is a lot of traction around. We're not at the level or the phase where people are asking, "Am I going to do something?" People feel somewhat of a pressure. I don't know if it's the right word, but like a certain presence or certain obligation to move forward. Yeah. I agree with Alex. It's not easy. Doing it in the public services is a lot different than doing it in the private sector. So with that context in mind, but I see a lot of open-minded people. There's a lot of conversation also, not necessarily around the technology, but I think we need to focus the conversation around the business solution. What are you trying to solve? And Diane touched a bit on it, and Alex also, like, we need to really focus on what do you try to solve, and then the technology is going to be coming, because Alex and all of us are not getting paid for the amount of algorithm we're using. It's not about that. It's about which tool we need to use to solve the real business problem we're facing. So I think it's a good conversation, but I think there's some execution still there to be done in the Canadian government, but are still having these conversations.
For sure. And I think at the end of the day, all of this connects to how do you connect this, like the planning, the governance, and then deliver the service at the end of the day for the clients. I mean, there's a lot going on here, and I'd like to touch on that part of the conversation right now. And Alex Benet, I'll turn to you on this one. I mean, how have you seen AI beginning to shape public sector operations? Can you pull the veil back and give us a little bit of color around that?
I mean, that's a great question. For me, I'm starting to see, to Alexandre's point, a lot more conversations, and I'll call it the margins of the executive cadre of government. So the CIOs get it, the chief data officer get it. Do the call center people get it? Not sure yet. Do assistant deputy ministers or equivalent around the world that are in charge of the big policy decisions get it? I'm sure they've read books, but like how to operationalize it, I think, is a bit of a gap. So to me, like, I think the regular sort of government operations people that you'd expect to get it, but they're usually the last ones to know about things, right? Like when budgets get decided, they're usually not in the room, in most government places around the world. In private sector, you'd have your CIO around the room to make a decision. It's more part of the culture. In government, they tend not to be, unfortunately. So the steering of this, how does AI become the predominant tool, as opposed to humans, frankly, because that's a hard conversation to have, to deliver some of these operations as it pertains to data relating to financial services, HR services, you name it. Like those are the hard discussions on the design front that I don't think public sectors, from what I've seen, and you guys talk to more people around the world than I do these days, but like I haven't seen it embedded yet into like full scale mainstream, not only designing at birth, but re-looking at how we do call centers, re-looking at how we do financial management. Like there's no way that financial reconciliation exercises should be done by humans anymore, right? Like it's just, it shouldn't. But yet we will continue to do it most likely for the next decade. So why is that? So to me, I think like it started to shape the operations, at least the option of AI is being put on the table, where I'm not sure I heard that 5 years ago or roughly. But like, has it made its way into mainstream decision-making? Like I could tell you at a table of deputy ministers in Ottawa, we talk about AI a lot, but that is also the problem. We talk, right? And this is something that you have to do, right? So talking is just doesn't do anything. So to me, that's where maybe the pivot hasn't happened yet. And I think if you ask anybody in the central sort of government area to make decisions, they probably, if they were being honest with you, would tell you they don't know where to start, right? They don't know where to start if you're a policy person or a comms person or a senior deputy minister. This is not your bread and butter, and this new thing has come in. And so I would say if we were to have an honest conversation with people would tell you they just don't know where to start.
That's an interesting perspective. And Diane, we do have a question from the audience right here. I'd like to pivot to you for a second on this one, because I think it touches a bit on what Alex is talking about, because a lot of, I guess you could say, governance is a huge issue. Risk is a huge concern. And that all revolves around security, safety. And Nadia quickly points out, she's asking the question about how do you plan to protect the data used in AI applications? It's very basic, but I think you've got some perspective to help her out.
Yeah, and a couple of things that have changed when we look at data privacy and security, both of them hand in hand, they partner really closely with AI, is there's a couple of different angles. First of all, data isn't what we used to think as traditional data. With generative AI, data is documents and images and narrative text. So there's that. There's the protection against people using AI in a nefarious way, deep fakes and things like that. And there's lots of brilliant people that are working on that. I've sat on a few forums on how do we protect against that. To answer the question that I saw posted by Nadia, really it's coming back to what's the problem you're trying to solve, because it's not the same data protection across everything. We have to look at the training data as well as the AI outputs, which is new generated data. It comes back to what's the problem you're trying to solve. If I'm looking at, so I think of our Helsinki Head AI, it's a clinical application of AI to detect early brain bleeds. You need to have the personal information, but you leverage all the existing policy on sharing of information in the health sector, which is provider to provider, need to know access, protect it within that realm. if I'm looking at a model that I'm able to get the information without any personal information or proprietary sensitive information, there are brilliant ways now technically to parse that out. We redact it, we de-identify, we look at the risk of re-identification of data. And those are all in place well outside of AI. We have those tools. It's really not a technology problem. It's a what is the right technology? And Alex mentioned that. What's the right technology for the problem? And then starting with what am I trying to solve? What do I need to know? Now, how do I protect it within that realm? And if there's an opportunity to not use it either in training data or in the actual output, that's what we try to do. And that's what we need to do. And that's what's being built into a lot of the policies, legislation, compliance guidelines.
Yeah, it sounds like a lot of fundamentals there. I think that's the one of the takeaways I'm getting here too. It's the foundational elements. Nadia did have a follow-up, and I did want to give her an opportunity to pose the question. It's essentially asking us if we're collaborating with Europe or the US regarding data protection laws. We're a global company. I think that's a pretty...
Yeah, and I'll answer that one really, really quickly is yes. There's lots of collaboration across the different compliance groups. I'm sitting on a number of different groups with the EU AI Commission, working with in the UK, working in Canada. There's some brilliant think tanks that are feeding into that, and our big vendor partners, Microsoft, Google, AWS, I'll go on and on, are also working on this problem together. The Turing Institute, for example, have a global forum for how do we deal with data protection, as well as how do we deal with deep fakes. So lots of really smart people are working on how do we enable AI for good and protect from where people are not using it for good, as well as how do we come up with a framework so we can continue to innovate.
We got to establish some rules, and we got to follow them. I think that's really important. Another question from the audience, and we love to hear these questions from audience. We encourage you to continue because you're also part of the conversation. Jana Pilon is asking something pretty interesting, and Alex Benet and Alex Sinet, I'll ask both of you to chime in here. First of all, the question here is, how do we enable a culture of change in public sector? How would it be different, public versus private? Alex Benet, I'll start with you.
Yeah, I think on what's different between public and private, I think I'll give you a quick example. When we run projects in the private sector, escalations are seen as horrible. You're burning bridges, and I don't want to upset anyone, and heaven forbid. And okay, well, if you don't escalate fast enough in the private sector, you get fired because the project isn't going well. You know what I mean? Like there's just a different thing there culturally. So to me, my recommendation would be if you're in government, do and don't ask. And it sounds horrible, and people are going to go, oh my God, I can't believe that's the advice you're giving. If you ask, you will get 100 reasons why you shouldn't do the thing. We are experts at telling people why we can't do something. Whereas then if you do it and then you show it and you put it on the table after, worst case, you're asking for forgiveness. But if it works, like you're going to be forgiven pretty quickly. In fact, I would argue you're not arguing for forgiveness. People are going to ask you to do more. So to me, we work, frankly, in an environment that's heavily unionized, that is, like this is the perfect environment to actually be trying these things out in small scale. Because what we do is we fail big in government. We plan big, we budget big, we execute big, and then we wonder why we're afraid of failing, because it hurts when we fail. Versus doing it small, doing it in partnership outside of your walls, bringing in different kind of people in the room, pooling funds. Some of the work, for example, we've been doing with you guys in Phoenix, like started off with $200,000. Like it didn't cost an arm and a leg, but we just started doing the thing, right? So to me, if you're in public sector, like doing the thing and then talking about it is more important than frankly having to go talk to people that have no idea what they're talking about in government when it comes to AI about why you need to do AI. Like that's probably the worst thing you should do. The last piece of advice is just don't break any laws when you're doing it. That would be great, right? Because I don't want it pointed back at me. We have official languages laws, privacy acts in Canada and things like that. Like just be smart about it. But just go do the thing, please.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Alex Sinet, would you like to finalize on that?
Just a little comment on this, and when I agree with Alex, when the government of Canada wants to do something, they do it big, meaning that they do the entire process, which is like all in. We're going to move forward, and it's a big machine, but we move a little bit slower, but a big machine. But in AI and in data in general, or I would call this advanced analytics in general, you want to be momentum driven and directionally right. You don't need to be absolutely right to the double-digit decimal. You want to learn as you go. So this is why I totally agree with that. Small bets moving forward. You learn as you go. You also need to have a strategy, and also need to have those guardrails that we're discussing. But at least if you are directionally right, it means you're learning, and the organization is changing and proving also by example what you can do and the realms of possibility instead of just talking about it. And I think that's what Alex is doing right now at PSPC and within the Phoenix project. And this is exactly the benefit. You see the benefit going on with this in terms of, I'm sure the conversation are different also on the perspective of how can AI help us, because you see it in action. I think it's key here.
And I think maybe just one thing to add that I forgot, like, do it transparently if you're in public sector. I think what's been so different in the partnership with you guys versus other suppliers, frankly, is your willingness to let the code go out in the public. Sounds silly, but like a lot of other places would say, "Oh, that's IP." It's, you know, so I would say private sector needs to rethink how it engages with government as well. If we're going to do a thing with AI to deliver a core service, the level of transparency of both the service supplier, in this case you, and you as government trying to play around with this stuff, you need 100% transparency in order to get trust. And I think that we've been able to do that very differently here. The code is released, the results are released. We're going to third party review everything. That'll be public, like not on our intranet, like public, because that's the level of accountability you should have in the public sector, right? So I think that's one thing we didn't touch on as well, but that's like super important to maintain or in our case gain trust in some of these sort of hot files, if you will, as we're using AI in them.
No, that's a really interesting point too, and I think sometimes it's underscored because the trust is vital here. It's everything, and the transparency is the way to get there. Diane, we've done and delivered some. I'd like to talk a bit about maybe some examples that you can bring for just to add some color to the conversation here.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, and you know what makes, you know, to carry the examples over from what Alex and Alexandra were talking about is we have a unique responsibility in public sector, and CGI is a partner to public sector. There's a lot of sensitive proprietary as well as personal information that we need to protect, and that's built into the process. So Alex mentioned the Phoenix Pay solution, you know, looking at efficiencies, process improvements, enabling humans to do their job with tools that increase the efficiency and allow them to get to the hard part of the jobs quicker. You know, some examples that have been around for a while in public sector, I'll give a call out to Western Canada, the BC Cancer Program, which that started long before generative AI was a thing. It came out of a lot of different AI-driven agents that we had during COVID to give a single point of access to information, to reduce the number of people that were calling the 811 nurses line for questions that were not health-related. So for BC Cancer, they've developed an agent, and they're continuing to evolve it, that is a single source of information for patients. It answers the easy questions, it allows patients to authenticate, and it has a live handoff to a nurse. A fantastic example of human being used where needed and leveraging the tools to be able to support some of those things that you could find the information on a web page or on a document. It's a complex environment for anyone who's had someone go through the cancer journey, that you're to get the information you need. So any way we can streamline that is the problem they were trying to solve, and then hand off to the nurse and then keep that information so we have access to what was that person trying to find out, from where do I park, can my father come to my appointment, to I need to fast, should I take my medication. Some other quick examples we're seeing globally is pointing AI as another tool in our toolbox on big problems, the opioid crisis. How can we get ahead and not just understand what's going to happen, but understand where in the addiction cycle can we make a difference in someone's lives? We're seeing the same with safeguarding children. We're seeing the same with evidence-based policing. I was just at a fantastic event at Cambridge University, which is focused on how can we now use these tools to safeguard families and to safeguard people that could head down a path and save their lives before they enter into a life of crime. So there's amazing examples, and they all start with a problem that you're trying to solve. And then, is this a new tool? Do we have a way that we can help? So really great examples of humans working in concert with technology in order to solve these big problems.
And ultimately, it comes down to solving a problem of resource as well. And how do you redistribute the resources?
Resource capacity is going to be a huge problem. I mean, I've seen numbers of 25 to 40% of our workforce is going to be retiring over the next 10 years. You know, we need to upskill people quicker. Great AI problem. We need to be able to work better with these technologies so that humans are doing the really interesting, creative things and use AI to do the things that are hard. I heard a great comment from somebody before that was, I'd like the AI to vacuum the floor so I can go work in the garden. And I think it's the same in the workforce. Let's use it to do the stuff we don't want to do, and we can focus more on what we need to do, the creative things that we need humans for.
Absolutely. Nurses and doctors, frontline healthcare, as many hours as you can give us, and then we'll leave the keyboard maybe to Spock at the end of the day. I think that would work really well. Alex, Benet, based on some of the examples that Diane has shared, what areas of government operations do you think are most primed for AI adoption, and where do you see potential resistance or roadblocks, if any at all?
I mean, I guess for me, I'm debating on starting with the roadblocks or starting with the areas of. So I should probably just ask ChatGPT how to structure this. But anyways, for me, I think the service delivery world is one where it's ripe. Call centers, some of our agents, when they receive a call on pay, for example, have to go into 17 different sources of information to try to answer a question, and the machine will be faster than your hand any day. And so to me, that's an easy example. Like, never mind, will Skynet take our jobs? Like, just even as a support tool, something simple. Anything that has to do with finances is another one. Like, to me, anything that's about crunching numbers, like we lost that fight as a species, 30 years ago, and yet we're still using humans to cut and paste stuff and run some Excel spreadsheets and you name it. So to me, that's a second area. I think the roadblocks will be culture. I'll get back to that. It'll also be not integrating. We're at a point in time where historically government hasn't integrated technology and senior policy decision makers, right? You see the countries that are doing it well, whether it's the Nordics or the Estonias of the world, that is together. They are one and the same. In Canada, until we wake up and we make digital first a reality, in service delivery at a pure policy sort of strategic direction for a country, then we won't get there. We'll come up with excuses. So the excuse I hear all the time for why we can't do digital first, not every Canadian has access to the internet. Okay. My parents are in their 70s. 2 years ago, they live in rural Quebec. They had to drive in the middle of a snowstorm to get to a Service Canada counter. So do you think that the counter covers more Canadians than the internet? Because I would suspect our physical counters do not cover more of the country than the internet. So why can't we go deliver a service where increasingly the largest growing population of users of the internet are the 60s and overs? So everything we do is an excuse, as opposed to saying, you know what, we might cover 90% of the country. We're not going to do digital only, but it'll be okay for a machine to help our seniors. I mean, talk about the opportunities we would unlock if we had the right policy decision and the right policy frame. The problem that we have is we have too many senior leaders, I think, that are in positions that just don't understand this stuff. And it's okay to say you don't understand, but that means you have to empower people that do, right? And that's the leap I think we're missing on the roadblock front. And it's always easier to talk about roadblocks and opportunities, frankly, especially when you're in government. But I do think that on the service front, there is an opportunity for Canada to leverage companies such as yourselves, all the great research we do that is world leading, right? And actually do something really cool about it.
That's really interesting, because it leads me up to my next question. And Alexandre Sinet, I'd like to come to you with this one. Mr. Benet spoke to empowering and really trying to help government along and help public sector along. What more can we do here from a private sector perspective?
I think it's one of the key element is we need to recognize that everybody is part of the solution. So a bit like Alex was saying is I cannot subsidize ourselves to the government and owning the business problems that it's having, but working together to define solutions where we bring expertise around the table and we all work together. I think I know it's an euphemism. It's a an euphemism. How you say this in English?
Euphemism?
Yeah, exactly. Thank you, Derek. Because at the end of the day, what we're trying to do here is create teams that are efficient together, multidisciplinary team with a different expertise that complement each other.
Right.
And are working, and this is exactly what we're trying to do, and we're doing right now with Alex and his team. But I think it is important here that the goal that all together working, it's not about CGI, it's not about if you're coming from PSPC, it's together you're building something that will help Canadian, and that's important, and that's the key here. So as a partner, when we look at these business outcomes we're looking for, this is how we can empower and can work on, okay, what's the business outcome? How can we work together to change and facilitate this and bring the expertise to the table, and not in a, like Alex was saying, in a black box approach. And this is not our approach. This is not what we're trying to do here. We're always trying to be in a partnership mode. And I think that's what also the private sector needs to adapt on these types of solution, AI and I would say advanced analytics. So I think it's a key factor for us to be able to do this, and there's a lot of opportunity to be able to do this.
And it comes down to team building at the end of the day, leveraging strengths and trying to put people in their best positions to succeed.
It's give you an example. AI project in general. I'm gonna say something very generic, so that don't throw rocks at me. But usually it's about 80% of data and 20% of like real data science type of work. Okay, so to understand the real business problem, you need to have done the work prior to do anything. You need to understand what are you trying to solve. You need to have that expertise, and that expertise cannot come from when we work in partnership with the private sector, because it needs to come from the government itself or the ministry. So, and that's something that is key. To my knowledge, all the project of AI I've seen is the key factor here. Do you know what you're trying to solve? We're not going to a fishing expedition here. Though. We know what we're trying to solve. The journey to get there will differ, and we're going to have some ups and downs and everything, but we know what we're trying to solve. And that's, I think, a key lessons for any organization that want to do this is you need to have that, and then you bring experts and all together. But I think that's important. And when I say teams in general, this could be multi-team, multi-thread, whatever. Like it's really around more the mindset that we need to have than the actual team.
Interesting, because the mindset gets you in a position to take the necessary steps forward in order to execute and get there. We do have another question from audience, and we like to engage with audience. And thank you to Kai. Question for you, Alex Benay. How do we gain trust from political leadership with AI programs? I mean, it's a bit of a tough one, but nevertheless, the process exists. I mean, what's the approach?
I mean, take the word AI and just do technology and digital in general, right? I think at least in Canada, I think if we're having this conversation in Estonia, the Nordics, even certain European countries, they'd be like, this wouldn't even be a question, right? Like you could just see the investment. Like Finland trained or wanted to train 500,000 residents on AI like 6-7 years ago. So like from a policy perspective, I don't think you have to convince anybody there. I think clearly people understood the importance of this. So I think in our case here, we have to get, at least I'll speak for the government of Canada, better at delivering modern things. Because if you are in any level of government in this country, there's not a lot of huge success stories at scale to point to in modern service delivery, right? So let's just use the one I'm running now. So Phoenix. So I've been here for about 16 months. How can I ask a politician to trust what I say when it pertains to Phoenix, which is one of the largest public sector leadership failures in the history of our country, if not arguably the biggest? So, okay, so the negative Nelly aside, what you do is you start small, which goes against everything we do, right? We don't plan small, we don't budget small, we don't enable small. It has to be big, and we have to answer all the questions before we start. So you start small and you swim upstream because that's what it's going to take, and then you have to show the thing. Super important, because we've been able to start, I think, getting into a better place with where we're going with transformation of our HR and pay system, AI, and our backlog operations, just by being transparent and showing the progress along the way and taking them along the journey. Now, we're lucky we have a fantastic minister at PSPC. We have fantastic ministers that want to see this change, and I would argue it's a politically agnostic issue. Like, you should be able to pay people properly, right? So I think in that case, it's probably the right topic too, to actually be able to apply some of the things I've been talking about around start small, show the thing, be very transparent, bring people along, fail fast, all of those things that frankly we don't do in the public sector, to actually do it here. And I have to say, like, so far it's gotten a lot of response, not just from ministers, but fellow deputy ministers and people around town. There's still some skeptics. I would argue that's healthy in this context. But like, if we can do it in the context of Phoenix, my argument would be we should be able to do that in a heck of a lot more places around government.
Yeah, that's the Mutar Nebula for sure. and I really appreciate the perspective that you brought there, because you really showed us from stem to stern how to get from one place to another and dig right in. Diane, I'd like to get your perspective on something I often love talking to you about: digital triplets. And I think there's something interesting here. We do have a question from the audience, from Renate. I do hope I got your name correct there. But it surrounds AI that essentially takes autonomous actions on behalf of users. How should the public sector prepare for this?
It's a great question, and I also love talking about digital triplets. The buzzword of the week or the month is agentic. We predicted this was coming. We called it multi-model, multi-agent solutions. And I'm going to try to break it down, and I'll give you some digital triplet examples. If you think of all these little foundation models, large language models like ChatGPT, Gemini, that people are already playing with on their phones, that is an agent. And an agent can be given a task. It can serve any service the same way that we've had models do this for years for efficiencies. And it doesn't mean when we have a model doing a job, it doesn't mean it's without checks and balances. So if you think of a whole bunch of these little agents that have been given a task, ChatGPT is great at generating information. It's great at retrieving information. What it's not great at is checking itself, right? So very similar to if I Google what's the best Italian restaurant in Ottawa, I'm going to go down the list until I see one that actually matches what I'm looking for. You need to be as discerning with GPT. But I heard from a public sector leader that I was chatting with, it's all great and fine that you give me transparency and references to where you're getting the information. But if I have to go check every single one, I've lost the efficiency. So can we add another agent, another little worker bee agent, which job is to validate the source of information? So I now have my ChatGPT, my Google Gemini. I don't want to pick any one tool. Claude is a fantastic tool from Anthropic, whichever your foundation model of choice is. If you have another agent that's saying, okay, I validated this, I'm going to score it out of 5. And if it's less than 3, I'm throwing it back. If it's above 3, I'm going to tell you I've rated this answer as a 3. That's going to automate the quality checking. And in a digital triplet model, it's how can we add a layer of conversational AI as an expert advisor to somebody? If you think in healthcare, you'd have all of the information available. You'd have different agents that are retrieving the information, generating, connecting the dots. But I have a single source, a single conversation with that data that I can interrogate it. So behind the scenes, these agents are making it easier to get us the information. But we build them in the same way we have always built in intelligent automation and these other tools, RPA, to be able to do the busy tasks. Take the information from the PDF, put it in Excel. Take it from Excel, put it in a database. that we've done for years. We just have more intelligence behind these now. And there's some fantastic data science approaches we have to checking the quality, the checks and balances. We put dashboards behind these things for transparency, but we don't want to have to force you to check every single place. We have key points for checks and balances. So hopefully that kind of explained when you hear agentic approaches, it doesn't mean robots gone rogue, or I've been calling them little robot friends going rogue. It means we're adding multiple agents, giving them a job in order to complete a complex task easier.
It's a team in concert, really, that's under one.
It's a team in concert where we're looking at where are the gaps in being able to use these models, and how can we create solutions that automate filling those gaps so we have higher quality for decision making. They may be just doing the fact checking and giving us more transparency. They could be generating new types of information that are going to make it easier. And that's what you're looking at in a agentic approach. And that's the foundation to our digital triplet, which is putting a layer of AI to let you have a conversation with your data. In public sector, it might be lots of different databases that you want to be able to query, having a single layer to that. So I can ask, what's the attachment rate to primary care physicians in northern BC without having to search through multiple places to get the answer to that question.
Alexandre Sinnett, complete that answer.
I just want to, we heard Diane and Alex mention explainability, transparency, governance, which are all super important elements, I think key elements of your overall AI or advanced analytics strategy. And because I just want to come back to one of our earlier point around where are you in your journey? If you are in the proof of concept and starting to play and touch a bit, it's not a strategy. You can test, but all these elements that we're discussing don't need to be defined day one. Like, don't need to define everything, but you need to have a blueprint, a plan to build on it and for the future. So what we didn't see, and I agree with Alex on that, is that we see a lot of conversation, proof of concept, maybe testing a little. We didn't see a lot of strategy. So to be a digital first strategy that includes the elements of transparency, around explainability, and like all these elements and guardrails in terms of ethics, so all of these elements needs to be together at some point, and not necessarily day one again, because you don't want to, like, you need to get traction before you can like define everything. But still, I think these are key elements that through your journey and maturing within an organization needs to be present. And explainability is underrated. People, I think it's key. We need to be able to explain what we see. Black box is a very bad idea for many algorithm or many solutions. So that's my 2 cents. I just want to add on that. Sorry, yeah.
No, thank you very much. No, I appreciate the intervention. I think it's interesting. I would like to, before we head to our final section, I think we need to maybe scratch a little bit more on collaboration, I think, between government and the private sector. We've talked a bit about it, the importance of getting to the table, the importance of exchanging and making sure we got the right people in the right chairs, trying to move this forward. Alex Benay, talk to me a bit about the role of collaboration here in accelerating AI adoption. Can you just give me a little bit more on that from a context perspective, and your vision for what that might look like in the next 12 to, I don't want to say 12 to 15 minutes, but 12 to 18 months?
Yeah, I mean, let me answer it from my time in private sector, if I can separate myself from my current employment. But what I would have loved to have seen, so I've been in both Microsoft and OpenText, which at the time was Canada's largest software company. What I would have loved to have seen from Canada is Canada, like other countries, really look at its tech industry and buy first from the tech industry in Canada. We have amazing research, amazing minds, and we never buy Canadian. We always have to let Canadian companies go and prove themselves abroad first. It's kind of like our artists, frankly, half the time. It's a thing that we do. It's in the water. And so to me, I have to say, like, the advantage of working with a Canadian company that shares our values in this AI world that we're doing on the backlog in our Phoenix Pay system, we didn't even have to argue about releasing the code on the internet. Alexandre said it, like, it's important to the company, it's important to us. You guys know what Phoenix is. Alexandre lives here, like, so he gets it. And you know what we're up against. And the only way we're going to win this fight is if we're extremely transparent. So I would think, well, back in my days in the private sector, like, I would have loved to have seen Canadian government entities work with Canadian private sector more. I absolutely think the EU regulations are great from a citizen perspective, but we end up adopting EU regulations or American regulations all the time in Canada. And yet we have a lot of technical capacity. And sometimes it works great for us, I would suspect, but sometimes maybe it doesn't. I don't know. Like, I am not an expert in that field, but to me, it feels like at minimum, there could be a tightening of that relationship in a way that has been different up until now. On the flip side, in the government, I would say that we need to stop communicating with people through procurements, public tenders. I don't know if you are Lord of the Ring fans, if you remember the Ents, like the tree race that takes forever to speak in the movie. That is the equivalent of a public tender communication exercise. It's not the best way. I'm not a marriage counselor, I'm not a relationship counselor, but there has to be better ways of engaging to do proofs of concept and then finding ways to scale faster than the current construct of our public tendering. And I would think everybody would benefit from that. Procurement officers you could do it way more transparently. You just release everything that you're doing. It's very easy to fight back against any kind of perceived or real issues around public tendering. Private sector you guys would much prefer probably putting together a proof of concept and having to answer a 2-foot thick binder that you have to answer, and then because you missed a comma in the wrong place, you're out. Like, to me, in public sector, that's what I would want to see, is how do we recreate that relationship in a way that's not 100 years of layered on things that went wrong, so our procurement looks the way it looks, and engaging beyond conversation with you guys on how to develop these things quickly. I think we haven't done a good enough job of that in Canada, and I would want to have that be faster as a public servant. So it's kind of like the same thing at both ends, except we're using slightly different words. But that rapprochement there has to happen somehow if we're going to actually create prosperity and productivity in our country in an area that we lead in global research, that we risk missing the boat on. So anyways, my rant is over, but you opened the door for it. I'm sure I will get in trouble for these answers, but here we are.
No, and thank you again for pulling back the veil and giving us a good snapshot there, because you touched on something very important, and that's important to all Canadians: productivity. We have not, our batting average there over the last, I don't know how many years and how many quarters, has not been good. And we're looking for pathways to improve and get better there. And impacting the ecosystem, that's a great start for helping the economy. I think we can all agree on that, correct? And you've talked about trying to bridge the gap between public and private in terms of the process of how we actually sit down and begin to communicate and talk about solving the problems that we want to talk about. Again, back to the fundamentals, back to the basics. I think Alexandre Senette, the question here is, how can public institutions, build and maintain trust with citizens in a way where the private sector is in a position to provide that guidance and a bit of that speed and efficiency that's sort of needed. That's where we're trying to bridge the gap. And I think the private sector is obviously in a great place to help.
I think one of the key elements, and Alex mentioned this earlier, is, and I agree with him 100%, is a procurement process set up a negative perspective. Because if you are trying to define what you're going to do for the next 5 years in detail, by hours, sometimes I have difficulty remember what I did yesterday. So just imagine what I'm going to do in the next 5 years. Yeah. So this is the way that, these procurement are set up for not failure, but to be different in life than what they were meant to be. But in the eyes of and the perception from anybody outside of this would be a negative perception. So by design, it is designed to be set up as a failure, meaning that it will not happen as it been set up. So why I'm talking about the procurement, because the perspective that people get is these projects always cost more dollar, like the bad people that are trying to get the most of the government. It's not the case here. So I think there's an opportunity in Alex where we can sit down and define the solution together. That's where you get the best of the private sector in these defining the solution, not just to answer, okay, this is my problem, this is the solution, this is what I want. So I think there's a level of changes and transformation that needs to happen so that the partnership that we see here can be sustained across not only with CGI, but other partner in the ecosystem as a whole. But I think the procurement aspect is key here, because I agree with Alex. We're talking through RRR sessions and the procurement, but and we understand the RFP process. I think the RFP process is there for a good reason, for equity reason, and that is okay. But that being said, can we work in new different approach that are not waterfall like these procurements are? So I mean, we need to be a bit more innovative. So that's my 2 cents. I'm going to stop there, Alex, because I'm going to get inflamed, me too, on this.
No. Nobody's got any stones here or baseballs or anything like that. Wonderful. Thank you. I'm mindful of the clock, of course. We're coming up to the top of the hour. Before we do conclude, I'd like to take a quick roundtable, so to speak. Just your perspectives of the next 12 to 18 months. If you had a crystal ball, what are you seeing? And what is it you'd love to see? Diana, I'd like to start with you first.
Yeah, it's a great question, because this is a space that, technology-wise has been evolving really quickly. I think we're going to see, to Alexandre's point on governance and strategy, a lot more alignment in what the compliance guidelines and strategy is going to be moving forward. I hope, speaking to Alex Binet's point, we're going to have more opportunities for hackathons, for collaboration across different areas. We're doing lots of great work in the UK. How can we bring that and show and demonstrate, this problem's been solved, and we can get 3 steps ahead because this problem's been solved, and CGI is invested in that, other organizations. But things like hackathons and opportunities for more show and tell and collaboration and hands-on workshops together, I think would just be brilliant. So where I think we're going to be, to that question, I think we're going to see more of this agentic or multi-model approach to address some of these technical gaps, quality, transparency, to make it easier to get through the privacy impact assessments, security threat risk assessments, and get these tools as an option across government safely, and more guidelines on what you're able to do. I hear that over and over again. I just want to know I can use this and not that. When it comes to the technology, I think you're going to see a lot of investment in also solving those gaps from our vendor partners like Microsoft, Google, AWS, and others. And I think this is going to continue to evolve as a human technology integration. I don't think we're anywhere near having these technologies take off and do our jobs. It's not the AI that's going to take your jobs. It's people that know how to work with AI that you need to watch out for. So, the next round, the accessibility to these tools has made the next round of our workforce very savvy on how you interact, how you do prompt engineering, how you do all of that. Bringing data closer to business decision makers. That's the focus of the tools. And I think that's 2025.
Sounds like a really good 2025. Alex Binet, your crystal ball, what's it looking like?
A couple of things. Closer to home for us in 18 months, I hope that the tool that we've developed together will be running all of the backlog operations that we have for reconciling pay differentials in the Government of Canada, because I think that would be the first time that the Government of Canada has a true operational AI solution to something. And so that's my hope there, so that there never is a backlog case older than a pay cycle or 2 in the Government of Canada. So in a lot of other places that would be mundane, but for us, given their back, story on Phoenix and things like that, that would be a huge step forward in the next 18 months. So that's thing one. And then hopefully, at least within public sector and in federal government in this country, people could then say, okay, this is, to Diane's point, like this isn't the boogeyman. Like this thing is actually should be deployed more broadly. From a Canadian perspective, I'm going to say not what I hope, but we better have figured out this digital first thing. at a policy level across the country, and we sit there scratching our heads, and we still design industrial age based, globally speaking, like in countries like Canada, like economic development strategies, when half of the economy in Estonia is digital, and it's been for a long time. And I'll use an example. In CRA, when you file your taxes, they contact you by text to say, if you have a normal tax filing, like these are your taxes, right? Press 1 or 2, and then you can identify through your digital identity that it's really you, so you're safe, and then your taxes are done. Here, we have to send out advertisements on the radio saying, if we contact you by text, it's a scam. And that is the gap we're talking about. Like, it's a fundamental, super big problem gap that we have in our economy, in our productivity, in our prosperity, and we need to figure that out in the next 18 months, because we'll continue to see stats that we don't like, I suspect. So what I'm hopeful for is that we can actually, have that kind of national policy dialogue somehow, to get it to a point where, our future generation of Canadians can be digital and we'll be happy about it. It's not too big of an ask in the next 18 months.
No, but that is a rosy picture. I think we can all get behind that one. Alexandre Sinet, your chance to top that.
Just, I think I will echo my colleagues here, Jan and Alex, but maybe one element. I think one word, acceleration. I think we're going to see an acceleration in the adoption cycle, in different phases of everybody's journey or every organization's journeys. And I'm a big fan of the augmented intelligence. So instead of talking about artificial intelligence, I like to augment the human. And I think that's what also, I think that they will be shifting into the semantic, maybe not using these words exactly, but the approach of human in the loop, I think it will stay and will be very present because of all the elements that brings this new technology and these new tools. So that would be my 2 cents.
That's really good. And I think to Diane's point, those who can leverage the tool and leverage it best can really contribute in a unique and a different way. I'd love to thank you all, first of all, for taking the time. This concludes our discussion today on how AI can potentially impact the public sector here in Canada. Big thank you to our panelists, of course, Dr. Diane Gutyew, Mr. Alex Binet, and Mr. Alexandre Sinet for sharing their insights and expertise. Special thanks to our audience as well. We really appreciated the questions and joining in on the discussion. And of course, for more information on today's discussion, I'm going to have a QR code up there for you. Please scan it on your screen. Thank you for joining us. Until next time, I'm Derek Marinos. Be well. Bye for now.